Hi, friends. This is your Scott pal, Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and I want to talk about this idea of Dungeons and Dragons being this human improvement engine and the ability to snap in to look at life and fix human beings. I believe that we can use Dungeons and Dragons to fix, like, to cut not just cut goblins in half, but to cut our deficiencies in half, right? That we can use it for purpose and use narrative to reach these new revelations about ourselves, about society, and I'm seeing some examples of this where you can see some examples of this even in Dungeons and Dragons competitors, right? Now, I've talked about it extensively on Dungeons and Dragons, but I saw an example of it in one of its competitors, and so I want to talk about that today. So, and we'll get there. So, I do D&D meta coverage, which is extremely rare. Professor Dungeon Master recently broke down what kind of coverage happens in the Dungeons and Dragons space, and he's like, there's three types. There's humor, that's definitely a type of channel. There's unpacking. So new stuff comes in through Dungeons and Dragons, and like, oh, here's this new subclass. Well, is it better than this old one? And just kind of unpacking each new thing, and how to, right? Like, here's how to use this new thing. And then finally, news. There's so much that's happening on Dungeons and Dragons that there's news. I don't do any of those. I do meta. I cover D&D canon. I cover repurposing Dungeons and Dragons. Actually discover accepting its actual purpose. It's not repurposing. It's using Dungeons and Dragons for what it was intended for originally, in my humble opinion, which is to fix society. That's I believe that's why Gary built it. He hid a human improvement engine in a game, in my humble opinion, right? But I saw but I'm not the only person doing D&D meta now. One of the guys who's doing really good job covering Dungeons and Dragons meta is Ben from Questing Beast, and he started to talk about some pretty incredible things. Tactical infinity, and I think that's one of the best descriptions I've ever heard of Dungeons and Dragons. And why Dungeons and Dragons, people are, here's a great example. Project Sigil, like this new, I downloaded that thing, used it for 5 minutes and forgot it existed. Video games are never going to be even the remotest competition for Dungeons and Dragons because they don't do what Dungeons and Dragons does. They don't function like Dungeons and Dragons. A dungeon master can change the story at literally, like, if a single player raises an eyebrow to an idea, they can take the story in a different direction. There's nothing like that in video games. Video games, they just suck. They literally suck compared to D&D, and they are never going to even be remotely close to what you need to do to make. They're never gonna make it. It's just, like, comparatively. So, but he's been talking about tactical infinity. He's also been talking about tunic, time until next impacting choice. Like, just these really super deep topics on Dungeons and Dragons. But what really blew me away recently was a friend of mine loaned me the. I didn't have permanent access to it, but loaned me the Power Rangers tabletop role playing game. Now, this is really fascinating because there's three properties that are all connected to Hasbro, that Hasbro has decided we're not going to do the tabletop role-playing game for that, but there will be a tabletop role-playing for that. G.I. Joe, Transformers, and Power Rangers. Hasbro owns all of them. There are very good, actually, I don't know there are very good tabletop role-playing games for each one of these, and I want to own all three of those books, but I can't. There's so many. There's just so many books out there. I have to be careful. I can't buy everything I want. Like, we got bills, right? Like everybody else, right? So I own the G.I. Joe book. It's on my get list to get the Transformers and the Power Rangers. But a buddy of mine lent me the hardback, and I was going through the Power Rangers book, and it blew me away, right? And really, what it made me realize is, Dungeons and Dragons does this specifically, but it looks like it's happening in this Dungeons and Dragons competitor, this Power Rangers book, which is tactical myopathy. All right, myopic focus. Myopic focus is looking at something at the granular level with like a microscope, right? And then macro stitching, right? Looking. So I was blown away. Like, so basically, the Power Rangers book was like, hey, let's talk about the Pink Ranger uh and the Green Ranger and the Blue Ranger and the Black Ranger and the White Ranger and the Yellow Ranger, and what do they stand for? What are they? Right? What is a Green Ranger? And I was like, oh, well, now they're going to talk about Tommy, the White Ranger, right? And what it did have those later in the book, it actually talked about specific individual Power Rangers. But before it did that, it's like, let's talk about the White Power Ranger at the macro level, right? And like, let's think of all the White Rangers and what did they stand for? What was distinct about them? How is each Ranger different than the rest, right? And it was incredible. I couldn't believe, like, a lot of people think that Power Rangers is silly, but when you hand that over to somebody who creates tabletop role-playing games, they're going to look at it at a level no one has ever looked at it. This happened on Star Wars. West End Games was like creating canon for Star Wars because the Star Wars creators were not even thinking as deeply about Star Wars as the people who did tabletop role-playing games. And I was blown away by, like, they were like, here's what's special about the Red Ranger, and here's what's special about the White Ranger. Not one specific personal ranger, but the aggregate of all Red Rangers. And like, that level of thought on something that, many consider to simply be a child's show is extremely deep and reveals powerful truths, right? About narrative, about ourselves, about values, about what we believe, about the power of belief. I was really stunned with how extremely thoughtful, and this level of being able to tear something down to its most granular level and then re-stitch it together, right, at a macro sequence, doing macro sequencing, was astonishing. I was just absolutely blown away. And the reason why I continue to be so excited about all this stuff is I believe that that's what Dungeons and Dragons is doing. It is allowing first the designers to look at life at a myopic level, and then to macro sequence the parts of life back together in ways that reveal truths to us, powerful truths, just things that are extremely important and extremely real and extremely profound, right? And I don't think it's not done in any other industry. There's no other industry that looks at life like this and then walks away with real solutions, right? And so that's the point. Is I am excited that I think on the D&D level we're starting to do this. We're saying, let's look at life at the macro level and the myopic level, and let's sequence it all together in ways that reveal truth. And it's exciting and profound. Every single word you just heard in this video is my humble opinion. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider like subscribing and have a fetch millennium.